In the Old West, courage crossed trails covered in gunpowder and silence. Fortunes vanished without a trace. Outlaws slipped through history. Now let's open the map and follow the clues. 15 mysteries of the West that remain unanswered. Number 15. Who was the real Billy the Kid? A legend of the Old West, he became synonymous with danger and escape. But behind the nickname, there was a young man with a name and a story. Henry McCarty, also known as William H. Bonney. Born in New York in 1859, he grew up amid loss, poverty, and petty offenses that pushed his life to the margins of the law. During the Lincoln County War in New Mexico, his fame took shape. Quick with the revolver, loyal to allies, and feared by rivals. In 1881 came the turning point that shaped the myth. Death in Fort Sumner, officially shot by Sheriff Pat Garrett. End of the line? For many, no. Over the decades, men emerged swearing to be the surviving kid. The loudest case surfaced in 1950 when Brushy Bill Roberts requested a pardon claiming to be Billy the Kid. The government denied it, and the doubt gained new breath. Since then, historians have combed archives, testimonies, and even proposals for forensic tests in search of final proof. Nothing decisive. Among the most provocative hypotheses is that Garrett helped the kid escape by staging the death. Supporters cite inconsistent accounts, gaps in the records, and the absence of irrefutable evidence of the body. If that's true, what deals, fears, or interests would explain the silence? Number 14. The Dalton Gang's hidden treasure. At the start of the 1890s, brothers Grat, Bob, and Emmett Dalton crossed Kansas, the Oklahoma Territory, and neighboring states in a string of bank and train robberies. With each escape, their fame grew, and so did a question that spans generations. Where did all the money go? The legend springs from how the gang operated. Living on the road, changing routes, horses, and hideouts, the Daltons couldn't haul safes or flash freshly stolen bills without raising suspicion. To avoid attention, part of the loot was said to have been buried in discreet spots: remote slopes, groves with marked trees, bends of creeks that dried up in summer. Small caches scattered, each marked by signs only the gang recognized. There are reports placing these stashes in lonely areas of Kansas and Oklahoma where the gang roamed for months. People speak of makeshift safes, ammo boxes, kerosene cans, glass jars, sealed in haste and covered with stone and earth. Precise maps never appeared. At most, marks on fences, cuts in tree bark, or coded coordinates in letters now lost. The reign ended on October 5, 1892, in Coffeyville, Kansas. Trying to rob two banks at once, the Daltons faced armed townsfolk. The shootout swept the main street. Several members fell. Emmett, wounded, was the only brother who survived. Captured, he served a long sentence and, even after release, said little that would help locate any treasure. If there were clues, they went with the dead. Since then, generations of hunters have combed hills with metal detectors, old newspapers, and maps. Some swear they've seen markings on rocks. Others claim to have cracked a code in a forgotten diary. Almost always, the shovel finds scrap. Still, the feeling persists. Perhaps just a few steps off a trail, a cloth bag full of coins awaits whoever has the courage to press on. Number 13. The Curse of Bodie. On the rocky slope of the Sierra Nevada in California lies the ghost town of Bodie, a former gold mining hub turned time capsule. Empty houses, dusty storefronts, and worn furniture tell an interrupted story. But amid creaking boards and wind slicing through the streets, another memory took hold: the Curse of Bodie. Tradition says that anyone who takes any object from the town, a nail, a stone, a shard of bottle, also takes along a streak of bad luck. Misfortunes, accidents, losses that seem to multiply. Many maintain the legend may have begun with park staff trying to curb theft. Yet over the years, rangers and curators began receiving a steady flow of packages and notes. Inside the boxes, souvenir objects return. In the letters, apologies and accounts of setbacks. Unexpected layoffs, crushing debts, illnesses, fights that brought families down. Some right after months of bad luck. Others, at the first serious stumble, run to the post office. Almost all ask the same: that the tide turn upon returning what should never have left there. Skeptics see only useful superstition, an efficient trick to preserve the heritage. Even so, the volume of cases and the urgency with which so many try to undo the mistake keep the legend alive. In Bodie, the silence isn't empty, it's a warning. And for those who stroll the streets frozen in time, the question keeps hammering away. What would you risk taking with you? Number 12. The Legend of Jean-Baptiste. Few stories of the Old West are as unsettling as that of Jean-Baptiste, the gravedigger who became a grave robber and vanished. Of uncertain origin, he arrived in Utah Territory in the mid-19th century and got work at the Salt Lake City Cemetery. He seemed a diligent employee, but behind the routine he kept a clandestine practice, removing clothing, jewelry, and small objects from the graves he was supposed to protect. The secret came to light in 1862, when the body of the outlaw Moroni Clausen was exhumed without its burial garments. The investigation led to Baptiste's house. There, authorities found boxes of funeral attire and belongings of the deceased. Outrage spilled into the streets. To avoid a lynching, it was decided to remove him from the city. At night, they transported the prisoner to isolated Fremont Island in the Great Salt Lake and left him there with the bare minimum to survive until trial. Weeks later, the return visit brought more questions than answers. The makeshift shelter was dismantled, as if turned into raw material for something else. In the sand, signs of freshly tanned leather and cattle bones. Of him, nothing. And the versions began. Had he built a raft and made the crossing? Tried to swim and succumbed to the distance? Or did someone silence him before he talked too much? Years went by without final proof, only scattered rumors. To this day, the name Jean-Baptiste reappears in accounts from travelers and the curious, as if the island kept one more detail, ready to surface when the lake's tide recedes. Number 11. The Curse of Slumach's Gold. In the heart of Pitt Lake in British Columbia, echoes a story that spans generations. The lost mine associated with Slumach, a man of the Katzie Nation whose life ended at the gallows in 1891. They say that decades earlier he found in the valleys and slopes around the lake a vein of gold so rich that any map would become a secret. Slumach is said to have returned more than once with a heavy bag, but always silent about the way. And so the clue became a myth. As the rumors grew, fortune seekers arrived in New Westminster and the communities of the Pitt River with a single question: where was the source of this gold? The dense forest, cold rivers, and treacherous geography drove many away. The stubborn pushed on. The tragic turn came when Slumach was convicted of murdering Louis B. After the execution, a version spread that he cast a curse. Whoever tried to find the mine would pay with their life. In the following years came caravans of prospectors, hurried letters, dubious maps, and empty-handed returns. Some came back exhausted, others didn't. Among trails that vanish in the fog and slopes that collapse at the first rain, the search became synonymous with risk. From time to time, a new account rekindles the fever. Old footprints, marks on rock, a handful of nuggets that appears without explanation. Each clue seems enough for another season in the mountains. Some maintain the mine never existed, fed by exaggeration, fear, and hope. Others swear Slumach's gold rests in some hidden tributary, waiting for the right eye and the necessary courage. And you, would you press on upon hearing a different stream? Or step back, remembering the stories whispered on the shores of Pitt Lake? Number 10. The Lost Ship of the Desert. In the Colorado Desert of Southern California persists a stubborn story, that of a Spanish galleon loaded with pearls, buried beneath shifting dunes. The origins are uncertain. Some accounts place the ship's entry via the Gulf of California between the 16th and 17th centuries. Others treat it as roadside talk. The core, however, changes little. The vessel is said to have run aground in shallow waters, and as the landscape dried out and advanced, ended up swallowed by the desert, awaiting a reunion. Over time, the legend fed on sporadic sightings. Travelers, prospectors, and locals swore that after sandstorms they stumbled upon darkened hulls emerging between gullies. The details never fully match. For some, it's a classic Spanish galleon. For others, a Viking hull displaced in time. There are those who tie the story to the roots of explorer Juan de Iturbe and the pearls of La Paz. Each new account rekindles the search and redraws the map of the rumor. What's missing, though, is what would end the discussion: reliable evidence. Searches and excavations haven't found fittings, preserved planks, or records proving the ship's existence. Skeptics note that wood rarely survives for centuries of extreme heat, abrasive wind, and salt residue. Even so, when the dunes shift and the low light hits the angle just right, the expectation returns that something might glint beneath the sand, and the story goes on, asking for the next chapter. Number 9. The Lost Gold of Doc Nos. On the arid slopes of Victorio Peak in the Hembrillo Basin of southern New Mexico runs a story that won't die. It speaks of gold bars, of a narrow opening that led to a chamber, and of a man willing to risk everything to get back there. In the 1930s, Milton Ernest Doc Nos, self-taught chiropractor and treasure hunter, said he found a cache of gold and ancient artifacts inside the mountain. Convinced the fortune was of Spanish origin, he widened the entrance with explosives. The tunnel gave way, the passage sealed like a trap, burying the path and stoking the legend. Undeterred, Doc spent years going door to door, selling shares in what he described as a colossal find. With investors' money, he organized new attempts and promised to split bars. Versions emerged for what was hidden there: colonial cargo, war gold. But ambition exacted its price. In 1949, during a dispute over the venture, Doc Nos was shot dead by associate Charlie Ryan. Ryan was acquitted, and the mountain kept its secrets. Since then, the essential clue, the exact point where Doc entered, has been lost among contradictions, promises, and torn maps. And even today, those who reach the foot of Victorio Peak swear that beneath the rock lies the fortune that turned allies into enemies and a dream into tragedy. If someone hits the exact spot, the story starts again. Number 8. The Mystery of Pancho Villa. In the maelstrom of the Mexican Revolution, Francisco Pancho Villa became a symbol of resistance and contradiction. He was the general who led troops, the outlaw who knew every shortcut in the north, and for many peasants, the protector who confronted bosses and soldiers. On July 20, 1923, in Parral, Chihuahua, his path ended in an ambush. The country stopped. Villa was buried in the cemetery of Hidalgo del Parral, but peace didn't come with the headstone. 3 years later, in 1926, came the blow that would feed legends for decades. The tomb was violated and the skull disappeared. The news spread like wildfire. Who took it? Where to? Versions arose immediately. One spoke of an unscrupulous art dealer who may have exported the relic to a European collector willing to pay dearly. Another pointed to U.S. intelligence agencies, interested in the trophy as a symbolic piece of psychological warfare. The hypothesis that refused to die, however, focused on a discreet and influential society, Yale's Skull and Bones, in New Haven, Connecticut. Among its myths, there is talk of skulls kept in private chambers, and the name of Geronimo, the Apache leader, arises in that whisper. Was someone paid to remove Villa's head and deliver it to the club for private display? Official and private investigations combed routes, ports, and archives. The Mexican government tried to recover the remains without success. Villa's body would follow its own route of tributes in the following century, but the whereabouts of the skull were never firmly established. And that's where the mystery hooks those who listen. Amid truncated documents, late confessions, and the vanity of powerful people, which of these versions holds up when put under the light? Number 7. Albert Jennings Fountain. Lawyer, politician, and war veteran, Fountain was an influential voice in the Old West. Even so, he and his son Henry disappeared without a trace, opening a void of questions that spans generations. On February 1, 1896, the two departed from Lincoln, New Mexico. Fountain was prosecuting suspects of cattle rustling and was heading to wrap up business in the case. They traveled in a simple horse-drawn wagon and were last seen by a passerby near the white dunes of White Sands. in the Tularosa Basin. When they didn't arrive at their destination, a search was organized. The wagon turned up soon after, abandoned and empty. No sign of Albert or Henry. Left at the scene were a pool of blood, a lone cartridge casing, and tracks of several horses moving away across the dry terrain. Signs that raised the alarm that something brutal had happened. Suspicion fell immediately on the rustlers he was prosecuting, and a posse formed to track those involved. The famed Sheriff Pat Garrett was called in to reinforce the investigation. Even with public pressure and the sheriff's experience, no trace of the Fountains appeared, and the case quickly went cold, leaving the community between outrage and silence. Since then, theories have multiplied. Some maintain that father and son were killed in revenge, with the bodies concealed in the vastness of the New Mexico desert. Others point to Fountain's career and the list of accumulated enemies, a sign that the disappearance may have been a political settling of scores. Number 6. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. The trajectory of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, two celebrated outlaws of the Old West, mixes fact and legend. Members of the Wild Bunch gang, they became known for train and bank robberies along the American frontier and became movies. What holds attention, however, is the mystery about the duo's fate in a Bolivian village. According to the official version, both are said to have died on November 7, 1908, after a shootout with authorities in San Vicente. The bodies were said to have been buried in the local cemetery, and the case was closed. Over time, that narrative began to fray at the edges. Evidence is lacking, neither an unequivocal photo nor a reliable fingerprint, to identify without doubt the dead as Cassidy and his partner. In this void, the whispers grew. What if it wasn't them? What if they forged their own deaths to vanish from the map? The trail is persistent. Supposed sightings in the United States, from Texas to the familiar landscapes of Wyoming. Stories of a familiar face appearing at family gatherings under a hush. And there's a piece that reignites the debate. A 1934 manuscript, Bandit Invincible, attributed to William T. Phillips, whom some pointed to as Butch himself. The text claims that Cassidy and his partner escaped Bolivia and, at some point, returned to the United States. True or not, the doubt keeps pushing the legend, and the next clue may be closer than it seems. Number 5. Pearl Hart. In the Old West, where gunfighters and bandits competed for headlines, a Canadian born as Pearl Taylor in 1871 decided to break the expected script for women of her time. She left domestic life, headed to Arizona, and between shifts as a cook and singer, drew closer to the rougher side of the region. In 1899, alongside a partner known as Joe Boot, Pearl cut her hair short, dressed in men's clothing, and chose the Globe Florence route for a daring hit. At the watering spot of Cane Springs Canyon, she stopped the stagecoach, collected about $431 and 2 guns, and even returned $1 to each passenger, a gesture that amplified the coverage. The escape didn't last long. Days later, Sheriff James Truman caught up with them. The news ran across the country, and she became a symbol of defiance of convention, fueling frenzied media coverage. The trial became a spectacle. Initially acquitted of the robbery, she was soon charged with interfering with the federal mail and received 5 years at the Yuma Territorial Prison. There, her fame grew. Interviews, photos, letters from admirers. A myth taking shape behind bars. After 18 months came a pardon from Governor Alexander O. Brody. Its reasons surrounded by rumors, lack of facilities for women, and possible pregnancy. Boot was sentenced to 30 years, became a trustee, and escaped during outside work, disappearing for good. Free again, Pearl tried to turn notoriety into a livelihood. She reenacted the robbery on stages, appeared in Wild West shows, and even joined Buffalo Bill's show for a time. Then she faded from the scene. Traces emerged: a tobacco shop in Kansas City, rumors in the Arizona backcountry, perhaps Mexico. Nothing conclusive. That's exactly where her legend gathers steam, because what comes next still holds the gaze. Number 4. The Lost Dutchman's Gold Mine. In the Superstition Mountains of Arizona, A mystery persists that has tantalized treasure hunters for more than a century. The legend revolves around Jacob Waltz, a German immigrant nicknamed the Dutchman, who in the 19th century is said to have found a lode so rich the ore could be cut with a knife. How he reached it is disputed. Some say he approached or betrayed an Apache family. Others argue he had the help of a prospecting companion, Jacob Weiser, whose fate became a matter of conflicting accounts. When Waltz died in 1891, he took the secret with him and left enigmatic clues. Descriptions of an entrance concealed by the late afternoon sun, skewed maps and references to rocks shaped like a sombrero. These breadcrumbs fed countless expeditions, leading adventurers to comb the Superstition Mountains with eyes hungry for the gleam of gold. But the mine's appeal goes beyond the metal. Stories of curses, disappearances, and untimely ends surround those who sought it, adding a persistent shiver to the narrative. At this crossroads between promise and danger, the legend grows, ceases to be a mere point on the map, and becomes a test of our hunger for luck, glory, and risk. And that's where the next clue tends to appear. Number 3. The Thunderbird of Tombstone. In Native American tradition, few creatures are as imposing as the thunderbird that carries the power of storms. For a long time, European settlers treated the theme as folklore, until in April 1890, Tombstone, Arizona, made the news. The local newspaper, the Tombstone Epitaph, published a sensational account. A group of ranchers had found in the nearby desert a colossal winged beast and brought it down. According to the article, the creature surpassed any known bird, displayed a wingspan of 48 meters, and a body the size of a horse. A grainy photograph accompanied the text, claiming to show the animal stretched out on the ground. The most repeated detail was the huge scale of the wings, spread open against the desert sand. The piece traveled the country and ignited curiosity. For some, it was the missing clue to prove the existence of thunderbirds. For others, a well-crafted hoax or simple misidentification. In the following years, new sightings were recorded in the region, each one adding fuel to the legend and drawing more attention. Off the page, however, the trail unraveled. No physical fragment of the creature appeared, and critics maintain the images were staged or manipulated. Some propose more prosaic explanations. Perhaps the ranchers saw a condor, or even the remnant of an ancient large teratorn, and the rest was narrative exaggeration. Even so, the story persists, and so does the mystery, ready to take the next step. Number 2. Roswell Incident. Decades before the Roswell Incident in 1947, a strange case rattled the Old West. In 1878, in the region that today is Roosevelt County, New Mexico, the rancher John Martin was found dead under circumstances that no one could explain. The news spread, and with it the perplexity. Reports spoke of injuries without a clear cause and a sequence of facts that didn't add up. A man died. Rumors were born. Without answers, the community sought meaning. Some pointed to something from the sky, a presence that would precede by decades the episode that would put Roswell on the map. Others, more cautious, argued earthly hypotheses, a clash with outlaws, an accident, perhaps a dispute that got out of control. What was missing, however, was what decides cases like this: evidence. The absence of proof kept everything in suspense, among versions that intersect and gaps that insist on remaining. The episode continues to haunt local memory like an uneasy prologue to what would come later. It's in this interval, between what was said and what was never confirmed, that the story still holds attention and pushes the gaze toward the next chapter. Number 1. The Mystery of Cochise. Cochise, legendary chief of the Chokonen, one of the Chiricahua Apache groups, remains a central figure of the Old West. Between 1849 and 1886, when the Apache Wars devastated the U.S. Southwest, he led with cunning and resolve, defending his people's territory and autonomy. His reputation was born both of victories in the field and of the ability to negotiate difficult truces, always with the priority of protecting his own. In 1874, already weakened, Cochise died of natural causes. What came next opened space for a riddle that spans generations: the location of his burial. It is known that his body was taken to the Dragoon Mountains in southeastern Arizona, a region of rock formations that was a stronghold and refuge of the Chiricahua. There, according to accounts, a small group of warriors buried him in an inaccessible cave or crevice. At their side was Tom Jeffords, a friend and trusted intermediary. The decision to keep the place secret was deliberate. They feared desecration, boundless curiosity, exploitation of the grave. Since then, many searches have crossed canyons and cliffs, always with the same question: where does Cochise rest? No expedition has brought definitive proof. The silence of the range says a lot. It keeps alive something Cochise defended his whole life: his people's right to choose how to remember their dead. And that's why this mystery matters. It's not just a point on the map, it's a pact of loyalty. If this story touched you, stick with us for the next journeys. And until next time, if you liked it, like and subscribe to the channel.